right behind me is a sign from the Socialist Party of Portugal that says Obrigado Lisbon. Now, the Socialist Party, of course, overwhelmingly won the last election, including in Lisbon, but really all across the country. I don't think there's a single region in which they didn't win and get more votes than any other political party, and so this is sort of just a victory poster, which I thought was quite interesting. Now, despite their name being the Socialist Party, like many other socialist parties across Europe, they can really more accurately be described as a social democratic party. Of course, like many other socialist or nominally socialist parties across Europe, they have become a lot less radical, a lot less progressive than they initially were when they were first founded and given that name. But if you want to find a more progressive, more radical political party in Portugal, you actually don't need to go much further than right next to it, where we can see a sign for Pessoas, Animais e Natureza, or People's, Animal, and Nature, which is another left-wing party that really, as you can tell sort of by this sign, focuses a lot more on animal rights, which they say that the current socialist government continues to ignore. Now, of course, you know, they have a broader platform, but they really focus a lot more on animals' rights, I find, than many of the other left-wing political parties, which, quite honestly, seems to give them a lot narrower of a political base. They tend to be one of the smallest, ambulance passing by, one of the smallest political parties in the Portuguese legislature. There are, however, some other parties which tend to be more radical than the Socialist Party, more progressive, that are bigger than PAN, and we can actually see them just by crossing the street. So for instance, right here we have a sign for the Portuguese Communist Party, the PCP, which says essentially raise salaries and pensions and stop the raising of the prices, presumably for commodities such as housing, food, and things of that nature. Now, the Portuguese Communist Party is one of the most prolific political parties in Portugal. Actually, before 1974, for much of the 20th century, this country had a dictatorship, and the Portuguese Communist Party was the main underground opposition to the regime, which was sort of in charge at that time. Now, despite this, the Portuguese Communist Party has never formed a majority government or been the main political party in a governing coalition. However, they have been in coalitions with the socialist governments in the past, which have been the majority in the legislature. Now, if we walk again right across the street, I mean literally, the Socialist Party sign is right over there. We can see this sign right here, which is for the Bloco de Esquerda, the left bloc, which is another left-wing political party in Portugal. Now, the left bloc and the Portuguese Communist Party occupy somewhat of a similar space, being left-wing political parties, parties to the left of the Socialist Party. But really the main difference between the two is mostly their base and their stance on social issues. It's said that the Portuguese Communist Party tends to have an older voting base, of course being the main opposition under the dictatorship. Lots of older people who were involved with the Communist Party during that period and the immediate period following the collapse of that dictatorship tend to be with the Communist Party, whereas younger people tend to be more members of the left bloc. And as a result, the left bloc tends to be a lot more quick to adopt progressive stances on social issues, or at least this is the way that it's been described to me by Portuguese people, is that the left bloc adopt more progressive stances on issues such as trans rights a lot earlier, just because they have a younger, more progressive voting base. Now, actually, on the other side of this sign, I have something I want to show you that is pretty cool. Of course, this right here says April is now. So for context, that dictatorial regime that I told you about was overthrown in an event called the Carnation Revolution, or also sometimes referred to as the movement of the 25th of April. And of course this sign right here is just commemorating the 50th anniversary of that revolution. Of course it took place in 1974, meaning that in 2024 we will be having a celebration for 50 years of democracy since that revolution. So I thought that this sign being on the other side of the Bloco de Esquerda billboard was pretty cool, seeing as the Carnation Revolution was a very progressive revolution to be happening at that time, of course being against a conservative right wing, some might even describe it as being fascist dictatorship, which was in charge in Portugal at that time, which instituted a new constitution, which actually put in the Portuguese constitution the fact that this country would be guided by socialism and have the goal of establishing socialism, which remains in the constitution to this day. It also coincided with a big wing of left-wing activism, strikes, seizure of property, and things of that nature, which occurred at that time as part of this very progressive revolution that, of course, parties like the Bloco de Esquerda and the Portuguese Communist Party want to get back to. That sort of progressive streak of legitimately trying to establish socialism, which at one point when it was put in the Constitution could have legitimately have been said to be a major goal, but now, of course, is something that the Social Democratic Socialist Party isn't really that concerned with, and the conservative Social Democratic Party, which is a bit confusing, but obviously they are even less dedicated to actually implementing this socialist system, which the Constitution says is a goal of the Portuguese nation. Now over here is another sign that is part of Portuguese political culture, the broader political context in general, but isn't necessarily a sign for a political party or really representing any sort of electoral goal, but is rather from the General Congress of Portuguese Workers, is more or less how I would translate that, the CGTP, and basically calling for a demonstration demanding all of these things, the general raising of salaries, the shortening of the work week to 35 hours, the eradication of economic precarity, and the defense of collective bargaining in Portugal. Now, the CGTP has a history of being entangled with the left-wing political parties in Portugal, and the two sort of function together, more or less. And so it's interesting to see that something like this is being called for very publicly, which is something that I don't think that we really would see in the United States. We wouldn't really see a union or a confederation of unions calling for a mass demonstration quite like that. Usually the most we would see is some Twitter leftists trying to call for a general strike by posting about it. Yet another event being advertised by a political group is actually an advertisement by the Communist Party of Portugal for an annual festival that they hold here called the Festa Vant, which is essentially a large party hosted by the Communist Party, a large festival. There are concerts, there's foods, but it is all put on by the Communist Party of Portugal every year in September, just to sort of be a large gathering. From what I understand, it's also quite a good opportunity for them to make a little bit of money. As you can see, it looks like they're charging some fees to go to the Festival, and basically, yeah, it's just an annual party that they host, which is pretty interesting. I don't think that you would really see something like that being put on by a leftist political party or any political party in the United States, I would venture to guess. It's just interesting to see the differing sort of political culture that happens here, in which something like that can really happen, where there's this large social gathering being hosted. So I just thought that was pretty cool. Now, I've spent a lot of time talking about left-wing political parties, and that's because, for whatever reason, this area seems to be heavily dominated by left-wing political parties advertising. But there actually is this one that I found right here, the Liberal Initiative Party, essentially just a centrist liberal party. And they're basically this sign, this little bit of advertising that they put out for themselves. Essentially what it talks about is just that the most of the taxes apparently that are being paid on gas, and just talking about how the gas taxes are too high, and calling for the lowering of gas prices. Well, specifically the gas tax. Obviously, that's a pretty standard thing for a centrist party to be calling for, especially with a social democratic party currently in power. So it makes sense that would be basically what their sort of platform is at the moment. But yeah, right-wing political parties do exist in Portugal, and it's not like they don't exist. It's just, for whatever reason, this section of town seems to be overwhelmingly dominated by left-wing parties, which could of course be thanks to the fact that we are in a rather urban area, of course being in Lisbon, the capital city of Portugal, as well as not necessarily being in a periphery part of the city, but being pretty solidly in the city center. As you can see, this is Campo Pequeno right here. And so, it's not exactly, out in the middle of nowhere, and urban areas tend to be more left-wing, at least in the United States, although I imagine that it also holds true here. Although that being said, directly next to Lisbon is a region called Alentejo, which is heavily rural, and it is also consistently the most heavily communist area of the country. Pretty consistently, the Communist Party of Portugal will do better in Alentejo, this rural region, than they do anywhere else. But yeah, I don't really know why that is, but yeah, it is what it is. Anyway, there is also another right-wing political party here. Initially I thought this was Chega, which is like a right-wing party, sort of in the vein of like National March, or any of the other right-wing populist parties that have sprung up since 2015. But it's actually Aliança, which split from the Social Democratic Party. Now, Aliança doesn't have any members in parliament, but it should be noted that, of course, it did split from the Social Democratic Party, which is currently the second largest party in parliament, as well as the party of the president. Yeah, the Social Democratic Party initially started as an actual Social Democratic Party, but turned into a conservative party as the entire country's political system shifted to the right, which happened sort of at the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s. Now, unfortunately, the Social Democratic Party doesn't have any advertising out here in this section of Lisbon. Otherwise, I would love to show you some signs, but they do have a considerable amount of influence. But yeah, that's pretty much all of the signs that I was able to find around this area, Campo Pequeno. But I think that about does it today. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope you learned a little bit something about Portuguese politics, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.